The purpose of life is a life of purpose. But what happens when that purpose disappears? When the world keeps moving, but nobody knows why? When the routines remain, but the reason is gone? When survival becomes habit, and life becomes something you perform, not something you feel? That's not just Fallout. That's us. Fallout's world didn't die in nuclear fire. It died when the meaning bled out. When machines kept cleaning houses no one lived in. When pre-war employees kept logging their fears into terminals, knowing no one might ever read them. When people held on to routines because the truth was too heavy to face. And the terrifying part? We're not far from that. Because sometimes I wake up and everything is working, my job, my family, my routine. But I still feel like I'm just drifting. Like I'm walking through something that looks like purpose, but isn't. This video isn't about Fallout's war. It's about our war. The quiet one. The one we fight every day between meaning and momentum. Between memory and motion. Between waking up and actually being awake. Some days, I do everything right. I wake up, I handle my responsibilities, I work hard, I show up for my family, I make my videos, I take care of what needs taken care of. And yet, even with all of that, there's this lingering feeling I can't always shake. It's like I'm there, but not present. Like I'm walking through something good, something I built, something I'm proud of, but I'm still just moving, going through the motions. And it's not because I'm ungrateful. I love my life. I love my family. I love what I create. But that doesn't stop the rhythm from becoming mechanical. That doesn't stop the spark from flickering out sometimes when no one else is looking. Fallout understands that feeling better than most people do. Because in Fallout, the world still spins. Systems still function. But nothing means anything anymore. You see robots sweeping floors in homes that burned down decades ago. You find terminals still waiting for the next log entry, even though the hands that typed the last one are long gone. You walk into towns where people move, trade, sleep, and talk, but they're not living. They're just repeating. Fallout isn't frightening because it's violent. It's frightening because it's familiar. Because it shows you what happens when purpose dies. But everything else keeps running anyway. And I think that's what scared me the most. When I realized I was doing the same thing. Not in a ruined vault, not in a blown out city, but in my own life. The routine was alive, but I wasn't always sure I was. And that's the part no one warns you about. The most dangerous kind of survival is the kind that convinces you it's enough. The kind that keeps you moving just fast enough that you never stop to ask why. Because once you stop asking why, you stop really living. And the truth is, that's where purpose begins to die. When I was younger, I didn't spend much time thinking about purpose. Not because I didn't care, but because the people around me were just trying to make it through the day. My mother was always moving, always working, holding literally everything together. She carried the weight of the house on her back. And I learned early on that motion could be survival. That sometimes just doing what needs to be done is all there is. And my father, he wasn't absent. He wasn't mean. He was still. He sat in his chair a lot. Quiet, withdrawn. And for a long time, I thought he was just checked out. That he didn't care. But as I got older, I started to see it differently. He was in pain. Physical pain. The kind that doesn't go away. The kind that drains you every hour of every day. He had a disease that wore him down year after year. And by the time it developed into cancer, that pain had already become part of his routine. He drank not to disappear, but to function. Not to avoid life, but to endure it. And that changed how I saw everything. Because while my mother never stopped moving, my father was surviving in place. Not because he didn't want to do more, but because his body wouldn't let him. And me, I was caught between them. One parent who pushed through the pain and another who sat with it. And somewhere in that space, I learned how to keep going. But I didn't always learn how to ask why I was going at all. That's what Fallout captures in ways most people miss. It doesn't just show you a dead world. It shows you inherited patterns. You see people surviving out of habit. Vault dwellers who follow protocols no one questions. Robots who still clean and patrol. Factions who hold on to systems that don't serve anyone anymore. Fallout shows a world where people keep doing what they've always done. Not because it makes sense, but because it hurts too much to stop and think about it. Just like in real life, some of these people were in pain long before the bombs fell. And that's what I saw growing up. A house where no one really talked about purpose, because there wasn't time for it. There was only motion, only pain, only getting through. And when no one teaches you to ask the deeper questions, you learn to survive without meaning. You learn to sit still when it hurts. You learn to move forward without direction. And maybe that's why so many people in Fallout aren't angry. They're just exhausted. Because sometimes the world doesn't need to kill you to break you. It just needs you to keep going, without ever asking if you're okay. I worked hard. Not just regular hard. I mean, overtime at a young age, doing things most people my age weren't thinking about yet. Grinding, saving, planning. While my friends were still figuring things out, I was stacking up to buy a house. And I did. I got it. I made it happen. And I'm proud of that. That's not something I ever regret. Not the responsibility, not the discipline, not the fact that I stood up and built something real in life. But sometimes I look back and I wonder about all the time that disappeared to make it happen. Because when you start building young, you don't just grow up fast. You skip entire chapters. You trade late nights with friends for early mornings at work. You trade memories for stability. You trade your youth for security. But when you finally slow down enough to breathe, you realize you miss moments that don't come back. That's what Fallout understands better than people give it credit for. The NCR, they built fast. They expanded, claimed, conquered, governed. They created systems and stamped flags into dust. But in all that growth, they forgot to ask what kind of world they were actually building. The Brotherhood, they sacrificed everything to preserve the past. Their pride, their numbers, their ability to adapt. They succeed at saving what they thought mattered, and lost themselves in the process. And in the wasteland, you find places where someone clearly worked. Settlements built with care, walls patched, machines humming. But the people who made them? Gone. Because sometimes the work gets finished, but the person behind it never got to enjoy the result. That's what I felt when I look back on those early years. I built something good. I built something lasting. But in the process, I lost a version of myself I'll never get to meet again. And no one talks about that kind of loss, because it's not tragic, it's not dramatic, it's just quiet. It's the kind of grief that comes with growth. You're grateful for where you are, but still mourning the pieces of you that didn't survive the climb. Fallout doesn't show you failure. It shows you success that came too late to matter. Victory that doesn't feel like winning. A house with no family. A vault with no future. A life that kept moving, but never stopped to live. And that's the question Fallout asks in silence. What are you guys building? And who will you be when you finally get there? I've always cared deeply. That's not a virtue. That's not some badge I wear. That's just how I'm wired. When I give myself to something, I don't do it halfway. If it matters to me, It owns a piece of me. My time, my thought, my heart. So when I fail at something that doesn't matter, I can shake it off. I can move on. But when I fail at something I care about, something I believe in, that failure stays with me. It doesn't just sting, it echoes. Because if you gave it everything and it still wasn't enough, then what does that say about you? Fallout is full of people with that fear. People who believed in something and watched it crumble in their hands. Joshua Graham gave everything to Kaiser. His loyalty, his brilliance, his voice. And when it all collapsed, they threw him into the Grand Canyon and set him on fire. He came back scarred, changed. But he never stopped believing in something, even if that belief now had teeth. Ulysses believed in memory and identity and what came before. And when the world forgot, he didn't. He wandered the divide, not for revenge, but to remind the courier that what we forgot still shapes who we are. Fallout doesn't mock that kind of belief. It reveres it. And it also tests it. Because in the wasteland, you can fight for something real and still fail. You can try to build peace and still end up in war. You can choose hope and still be alone at the end. Fallout ultimately asks you, what if you put your soul into something and it doesn't save anyone? What if you give it everything and it still burns? That's not fear, not failing. Failing with meaning and watching that meaning turn to ash. But here's the part that really breaks me. You can also succeed and it can still mean nothing. You can win the fight, build the walls, lead the faction, and feel absolutely nothing when it's done. Because success without purpose, that's just emptiness with a trophy on top. I've felt both. I've felt the pain of trying and falling short. I've felt the hollowness of winning something that didn't matter in the first place. And between the two, I'll take the pain every time. Because at least the pain means I cared. At least the pain means I tried for something that mattered. At least the pain proves I was alive. Fallout understands that. It doesn't reward the right choice. It doesn't protect your heart. It just asks you to choose and live with what comes next. Because in the end, it's not the failure that haunts you. It's the fear that you might succeed and still feel nothing. If I had to choose one character in Fallout to represent who I am, I couldn't. Because I'm not one. I'm two. There's Joshua Graham, the Burn Man, and then there's Ulysses, the forgotten courier who never stopped walking. Joshua was a man of faith, loyalty, and conviction. He gave everything to something larger than himself, and when that belief turned on him, when the very thing that he built betrayed him, they threw him into the Grand Canyon, wrapped in fire. But he lived. Scarred, yes. Changed. But more focused. More dangerous in his stillness than he ever was in his violence. And he didn't come back for revenge. He came back because conviction doesn't burn away. Because some people carry purpose like a torch through a blizzard. I relate to that. Because I've walked through fire, not literally, but personally, emotionally, and spiritually. I felt what it's like to be broken and still stand back up. Not because I wanted to prove something to anyone else, but because I refused to let that pain define the last thing I ever said. But then there's Ulysses. Quieter, colder, and calculated. He's not fueled by rage, but by memory. He doesn't scream. He speaks in symbols. He walks through ruins like they still whisper. He forces you to remember what you tried to forget. And I carry that part of him too, because I remember things most people want to let go of. I walk through memories that never quite leave me, and I know the weight of trying to make someone see what they've forgotten. even if you have to burn bridges to do it. Joshua is my fire. Ulysses is my silence. And together, they make something I understand more than anything else in this game. A man who has been hurt, but never hollowed out. A man who has failed, but never surrendered in his purpose. A man who walks alone, not because he doesn't care, but because he cares too much to follow anyone who's forgotten what they stand for. Fallout doesn't give you clean heroes. It gives you fragments. Pieces of belief, pain, silence, and resilience. It gives you choices that don't fix anything, but reveal everything. And in that reflection, I saw myself, not as a courier, not as a sole survivor, but as someone walking their own divide. Not because I want revenge, not because I need validation, but because I've lived through fire, and I remember. Fallout's world is quiet, not peaceful, just numb. It's a place that should be full of rage, full of grief, full of fire, but most of the time, it's just empty. And the question I keep coming back to is this: is Fallout a metaphor for depression? Or is it a metaphor for apathy? Because they're not the same thing. Depression is feeling too much all the time. Apathy is feeling nothing. And in the wasteland, it walks the line between both. You see it in how people live. No one cares about law anymore, about justice, about mortality. There's no real order, just the illusion of it. People don't resist chaos because it's all they've ever known, and that isn't anger. That isn't even acceptance. That's apathy. It's the Protectatron still guarding the checkout aisle, the Mr. Handy still sweeping an empty house, the settlers who talk about crops while standing next to corpses. That's not survival, that's inertia. That's momentum with no meaning. And then, there's the other side. There's the depression. And it's everywhere, if you know how to see it. In the Pulaski preservation chambers, when you open the door and find a skeleton inside, somebody who thought they could survive, somebody who had hope. And all that's left is a husk of somebody who died waiting to be saved. In the terminal logs, in the holotapes, the last words of people who knew no one would ever hear them, and wrote them anyway. Goodbyes whispered into machines. Regrets typed into silence. You walk through towns that once had families, music, conversation, and now it's just wind. You realize that someone loved this place once, and now it's a pile of ash with furniture still in it. That's depression. The weight of memory, the ache of what used to be. Fallout never rubs it in your face, but it's always there. In the quiet corners, in the stories no one's reading. And then there's Nipton. The one place in the Mojave where someone does show emotion. The lottery winner, the man dancing in the ashes, grinding like he won something. And in a way, he did. He's not the one who got to get crucified. He's not the one who got shot. But his laughter doesn't feel like victory.
Yeah! Who won the lottery? I did! Smell that air! Couldn't you just drink it like booze?
It feels like a nervous breakdown with a smile. Like the only thing left to feel is absurdity. And that's when it hit me. Fallout isn't just about depression or apathy. It's about what happens when feeling itself starts to collapse. When the heart shuts down to protect itself. When the mind lets go. Not because it's free, but because it's tired. And the reason that's so terrifying is because we see it here in real life. People waking up every day doing the same thing. Scrolling the same feed. Ignoring the same pain. Not because they're okay, but because they don't know how to not be like this anymore. Fallout didn't invent that feeling. It just made a world where it's the only thing that's left. The world didn't hand me purpose. It didn't come in a flash of light or some perfect moment of clarity. It came after pain, after mistakes, after waking up one day and realizing I didn't want to go out like this. I lost both my parents. That was the beginning of the slide. And I didn't fall all at once. It was quiet, slow. A drink here, a bad habit there. A kind of spiral you don't notice until you're already deep in it. Until one day, I found myself in a jail cell. And that was the silence I couldn't ignore. No one else to blame. No way to lie to myself. Just me and what I had become. And something about those days, it changed me. Because when you hit bottom, you realize survival isn't enough. You don't just need to breathe, you need to matter. And that's when I started trying again. Not for the world, not for attention, but for me, for my kids, for my wife, for something inside of me that still wanted to build, even if it had been buried for a long time. And it wasn't easy. It still isn't. But that's the difference now. I'm doing it on purpose. I'm living on purpose. Fallout taught me that purpose isn't a reward. It's not XP. It's not a title. It's a choice. You see it when you help a settler. Not because the quest said so, but because you could. You feel it when you build a settlement, not for caps, but because someone might be safer there. You choose it, even when the world doesn't thank you, even when no one notices. That's what I started doing with my videos. It wasn't about getting big, it wasn't about going viral. It was about helping someone else not feel the way I felt. About making something honest. About saying something in a world full of noise. And I found that when I lived for that, when I created for that, everything started to make more sense again. Purpose didn't just show up and hand me a plan. It just whispered, start walking. And I did. Not fast, not always forward, but with intention. And that's what Fallout taught me better than anything else. That purpose isn't given. It's made. It's earned. One choice at a time. If I were a character in Fallout and someone found my holotape long after I was gone, I know what I'd want to say. I wouldn't give a list of coordinates. I wouldn't leave a secret stash. I'd leave a warning. And a whisper of hope. I'd say, we got too comfortable with going nowhere. We stopped asking why. We survived, but we forgot to live. And that's what ended the world long before the bombs ever did. But I would also say this. If you're hearing this, then it's not over. Not yet. There's still time to remember what matters. To build something better. To choose purpose again. Not the kind that's handed to you. Not the kind that looks good at a headline. The kind that makes you better when no one's watching. The kind that saves one person, or maybe just saves you. That's the real story Fallout has been trying to tell us. Not that the world ended, but that we still have the chance to build something worth surviving for. So, if this meant something to you, if it helped you see Fallout a little differently, or maybe even see yourself a little more clearly, then stay with me. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, not because it's content, but because we're building something here, one real thought at a time. This isn't a game, by the way, though, guys. It's also a mirror, a warning, a reminder that the bombs are always ticking, and that the only thing louder than the blast is what you choose to leave behind. Corn out.